My guest today is Dr. Beate Peter, geneticist, speech-language researcher, and one of the visionaries behind Babble Bootcamp. You may remember her from our recent episode on NIH funding. She's back on the podcast, and today we're going to be diving deeper into her groundbreaking work helping children with Galactosemia and now Down syndrome find their voice, quite literally, from the earliest months. We are going to dive deep into Babble Bootcamp and the science of it and much more. Dr. Peter, thank you so much for joining us on the podcast today.
It's entirely my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Of course. I had Dr. Nancy Potter on a few months ago, and she was talking about her memory of getting Babble Bootcamp started. And I actually pulled the quote because I remembered this one thing that she said, and I thought it was funny. She said, I was working on the Duarte study. She's talking about what she was doing during the time that you called her. She said, I was working on the Duarte study with Dr. Judy, and for 3 years we had been testing all of these kids, and I was doing that in addition to teaching full time. And Beate Peter called me up and she said, hey, Nancy, I've got this great idea. We should proactively do speech therapy on kids with galactosemia. They're the perfect population because they're identified at birth, and the parents are very diligent because you have to know what has milk in it and what doesn't. And so they're a really in tune group, and you've already done the groundwork for it. So how about we do this? And she said, well, gosh, I'm traveling every month. I'm taking care of my parents and I'm teaching, but okay, that sounds like a great idea. And she said, if you write the grant, I'll jump on it, but I've got to go finish this Duarte study. And I just thought that was a really funny recounting of her being pulled into the study by you, even though she's doing these other things. I'd love it if you could give us your recollection of how that went down and how it all got started.
Sure. So one of the early points in this whole story was I was at an ASHA conference, and I was in a seminar that Nancy Potter presented at. And she talked about her work with children who have classic galactosemia and other types of galactosemia. And she talked about apraxia. That's why I was there. I'm interested in the genetics of apraxia. And I heard her talk about all the traveling she did and all the assessments she did with these kids. And I kind of tucked that away somewhere in the folds and crevices of my brain until I thought one day I'm fiercely interested in the genetic substrates of various types of severe speech and language and reading disorders. But the biggest question is, well, what are we going to do with this knowledge? You can study like until you're blue in the face about the genetics, but what good does it do? How does it help children who have these disorders? And somehow I thought, what if we look at children where we already know that they will have a risk, but what if we look at them as newborns and see if there's anything at all that we can do before they start showing us that they have trouble. And that doesn't happen typically until they're 2, 3, 4 years old. By that time, a lot of time it's already passed. So can we do something proactively? And so I remembered, wait, one type of child where we know that they have a risk for like apraxia, that, well, give Nancy Potter a call. So I did. And that was like the beginning of the long journey that we've been on together so wonderfully and so fruitfully. It's been great.
Did you and Dr. Potter know each other well before that?
No.
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 Hey, remember me? I was at that conference you talked at one time.
I did bring it up, and she did remember, of course, talking at the ASHA conference about her work and especially about all the traveling she did to visit all these different families. But yeah.
And whenever you heard her talk about all of these families and this work that she was doing with galactosemia, did you know what galactosemia was before that?
I did not. It's rare, right? As you know, it's very rare. And I had not really encountered it in my clinical work. I worked as a speech-language pathologist for about 3 years in the public schools. And I'd encountered Down syndrome, yes, but not classic galactosemia.
And so you heard Dr. Potter talk about just how prevalent apraxia of speech is in the galactosemia community. Mm-hmm. Did you then, you said you just filed that away. Mm-hmm. Was the next time it got brought up when you had this idea, or did you familiarize yourself with it at all?
I looked into it a little bit, but so since I knew I was going to be talking to you today, in my office at Arizona State University, I have a bookcase full of handwritten notes in 3-ring binders, and there's one that says early intervention on the spine, and that has my handwritten notes from my very, very first discussion with Nancy Potter over that's before Zoom. It was February of 2014. And I remember
Wow.
that my collaborator and former mentor, Dr. Carol Stoll-Gammon, was on the call too. And we just threw out this idea to see what Nancy would say. And I wrote down that Nancy said, well, Beate, you have to remember galactosemia is rare. There's maybe only 150 babies born a year in the US, and you want to do a clinical trial? That's going to be an uphill battle to find these babies. Oh, okay, well, we'll start very, very small then.
And I mean, it's amazing how far it's come and what you guys have been able to accomplish. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. I have some personal stories to share as well. But before we get there, give us your background. Where are you from? What did you study? What was your journey like up until kind of this Babble Bootcamp phase?
Yeah, sure. You could probably tell the minute I open my mouth and start talking, I wasn't born in North America. I was born in Germany. And I came to the US long after the time where you can learn English without an accent. So my first round of study was actually English literature and language and psycholinguistics. Then I became interested in speech-language pathology. And so I did that. And while I was doing my master's degree and getting some clinical experience, I got bitten by the research bug really hard. So I rolled straight into the PhD program at the University of Washington with Dr. Stoll-Gammon as my mentor. And while I was in that program, I got bitten by another bug, and that's the genetics bug. So my little bit of clinical experience had shown me, I had, like, for instance, on my caseload, 4 siblings from the same family, all with the same severe speech disorder. And I'm thinking, there's got to be a backstory to this. I have to find out what's going on. So when I finished the PhD, I applied for a position at the University of Washington. There was a postdoc position. And I applied for it with a mentor in medical genetics at the University of Washington. It was really hard. I wanted a mentor who was experienced in speech genetics, and there is no such a thing. The closest I could come was somebody who studied the genetics of dyslexia. So that was Dr. Wendy Raskin, MD, PhD. I met with her, and the first thing she said, we've never had a postdoc from upper campus, meaning not medical school. I don't think this will work. And I thought, okay, forget that idea. The next day, I got an email from her that started out with the words, if I haven't scared you off completely. You know how history sometimes is, like something happens and your whole life takes a turn. So Dr. Wendy Raskin took me on. I studied under her direction for 3 years. I was in medical genetics, and I ended up with a certificate in statistical genetics, which is super helpful now to me when I analyze genetic data. And that's what I teach my students to do as well. But that's how I got started in genetics. And then the idea of translating what we do in behavioral genetics, medical genetics, into action. That's how this whole galactosemia journey took its start.
Yeah, it kind of seems like it's almost the perfect, the middle part of the Venn diagram where things overlap, where it's like you've got genetics background, but you've also got a speech and language pathology background, and it's like galactosemia is kind of both of those things, and it's super, super interesting. You've mentioned genetic substrates of disorders earlier, and like what do you mean by that? What does that mean? And like, what are you interested when you say you're interested in genetic substrates? Like what is that part of the field?
So I'll give you an example from a paper that I just submitted for publication. So I'm also very, very interested in understanding and working for the benefit of children with Bainbridge-Roper syndrome. And that disorder is multifaceted, and it's caused by a mutation or in a variant or change in the ASXL3 gene. And so understanding how you get from the genetic change to how the brain processes information differently to the outward phenotype. And these kids are said to hardly ever develop spoken language. And so understanding that the gene that causes, when mutated, that causes Bainbridge-Roper's is highly expressed in the cerebellum. And the children who have this disorder have if they speak at all, severe apraxia of speech, and they also have severe motor discoordination disorder and balance issues. And so the story that I'm publishing, hopefully soon, will explain how you get from a gene to a cerebellum not working to its maximum capacity to downstream phenotypes that are linked to the cerebellum. So that's what I mean with understanding the gene-brain behavior connection. And then I'm already thinking forward, putting these babies into the Babble Bootcamp to counteract to
I was going to ask.
Yeah, what we call creating resilience against anticipated difficulties. That's what the Babble Bootcamp is designed to do.
And so you're interested, obviously, in studying, kids with galactosemia and kids with Bainbridge-Ropers, kids with Down syndrome, I know, is become part of Babble Bootcamp. Are there any other diseases out there that are, you're kind of focused on a lot?
We will. We had collected some pilot data on children who were born preterm. Now, that's not a genetic etiology, but these kids also have a risk for delays in speech and language. We have tossed around the idea of focusing on children who have an older sibling with autism spectrum disorder, because the next born children are at increased risk just because it seems to run in the family. Another population we've thought about is infants born with hearing loss due to various causes, and not necessarily genetic, but, is there something that we can tailor, like in the Babble Bootcamp, starting close to newborn as we can, to try this resilience model in all these different populations of infants at risk.
And so you're really identifying populations that you know are at a higher risk. And what you're positing, what your thesis is that if we can get them beforehand, before we see the delay, if we can enact these strategies, we can prevent things like apraxia of speech or the speech and sound disorders, and the data so far has shown that that's true. Yeah.
Yeah, it has, much to our surprise. I mean, the magnitude of the effect has caught us all off guard, to be honest. But I just submitted a paper earlier this week to a journal in which we make the point that starting this very early and intense intervention, maybe the averages in the groups are higher, but what's particularly striking is that there are no children, or very few, with super, super low scores post-intervention. So those would be the children who, once they're old enough to be tested by someone at age 2.5, 3.5, 4.5, once they score so many, 1.5 standard deviations below the mean, they would be qualified as needing therapy. And the kids that with classic galactosemia who went through the Babble Bootcamp at follow-up, there were very, very few who would have qualified for services at that point. So what we think is happening is that some of the most severe outcomes are preventable through early intervention.
And that is so wonderful. It's also, so a little bit of personal share. Elliot, he's 8 months old, and we are going through the state services of trying to get him support. And what that process looks like is you go to the regional center, you say my child should be eligible for this. He has galactosemia. They come, they evaluate your kid, they do all the evaluations, and then a panel looks at all of the evaluations and decides whether they want to give you services through the state. And we heard time and time again that in California, they do not give speech services before 18 months. That is the standard. That is the natural. That's what even if they were born with Down syndrome, and it's very, very likely they're definitely going to have speech disorder, they still do not give it before 18 months. And actually, a couple of weeks ago, I asked to be a part of that panel consideration. I said, can I sit in and give a statement? And I brought Dr. Potter along with me. And we gave a statement to them about how effective something like Babble Bootcamp, which is the first early intervention targeting infants speech program, and how effective it can be specifically in kids with galactosemia. And the people on obviously most of the people on that board have never heard of galactosemia. They've never considered a case, but they had never heard of Babble Bootcamp. They don't know who Dr. Potter and Dr. Peter were, and they were hearing all of this information for the first time. And they were open-minded, I guess I would say. But they didn't say like, oh yeah, it's going to be approved. It was much more of like, oh, well, this is the policy and we have to apply through this and this, and we don't do it until 18 months. And so I just feel like it is a little frustrating because there's going to be some pushback in terms of like policies and the politics of it all, of like, this is early intervention before 18 months is not something anybody is like doing really on the state side. So I'm just curious, what are your thoughts just on like getting this through to becoming something that is a norm?
That is such a wonderful question. First, I think people need to see the evidence behind the approach. And since oftentimes services are given out of budgetary consideration, if we can show that it saves a ton of money if you prevent a problem from cropping up, then that might change some minds. But I can tell you, just in the last few weeks, for some reason, the Babble Bootcamp is making the rounds. So I've gotten an email from a speech-language pathologist in Canada who's like a professional leader in the field, who they're thinking about adding Babble Bootcamp to the services that they provide.
That's amazing.
And I'm in the process of being onboarded to a Western Australian university where they're trying to bring the Babble Bootcamp to a community in Western Australia, where they believe that the children could really benefit if they're early on introduced to competencies in the communication realm that would make their speech and language development go so much more successfully. And ideally, going into the school years, it would set a good foundation. So that's one. There's several other examples that I've encountered recently of people who are thinking, oh, let's try this in the community. Let's offer this to our speech and hearing clinic. Let's make it a thing that we offer. And so also the online training that Northern Speech Services offers now, that Nancy Potter and her lab and some of us helped with. Nancy being the number one person who thought of the idea and pulled it off. That is flying off the shelf, is what people tell us at Northern Speech. So it's generated a lot of interest. So if we can show that this is the way to go, rather than the wait and see approach, then hopefully it doesn't take the proverbial 17 years, if you've heard of that, from discovery to implementation. Maybe we can do it a lot faster. That would be my dream.
I certainly hope we can. And I think it's they say, how do you eat an elephant? Well, one bite at a time. You slowly but surely, the Western Australia, the Canada, maybe the California, maybe this, maybe that. And then eventually you look back and you're like, wow, we've made a lot of progress. And that's the hope. But you said, that we have to show the evidence. And I want to get to that. I want to dive into the evidence, but I want to remind people on what Babble Bootcamp is. Maybe some people listening to this haven't heard of it or don't really know what it is. It's a program that you guys developed after you did these trials. And so tell us about what the trials looked at, and then tell us, how you guys were implementing this program during the trial.
So step one was to sit down in the lab and think, what can we actually do that is really easy for parents to follow up at home? And things like real simple ideas, each one of them is no rocket science, but put together in intensity, it seems to make a difference. So things like when parents have a newborn or very small child, and these children tend to be quiet when they're old enough to make volitional noises. They tend to be quieter, maybe. So encouraging people to hold their newborn, give the newborn a lot of holding and looking at the newborn's face in a well-lit area so the newborn can see the face and watch the face move and hear what comes out of the acoustics. So create a perception of the visual and the acoustic and form the earliest associations of speech sound. And from there on out, things like your child is making a sound. You make a sound back. You reflect that back. Don't let it just go. Don't respond with silence. Do something. Acknowledge that you heard the sound. Say it back to the baby. Because the research says that if you imitate what the child said, there's just a fairly recent paper that came out, then children tend to make more sounds. And the more sounds they make, the more opportunities you have to. So what we did initially, I applied for a seed grant from ASU's Institute for Social Science Research, a small seed grant for $8,000, and they actually gave it to me. And so we had the first little bit of money we got together. Nancy was already on board, and Nancy said, I have this great colleague, this speech pathologist. She's wonderful with children. Her name is Jenny. Can we onboard her? And so we sat down, we brainstormed. In my lab, I had a bunch of like PhD students and undergrads and graduate students. We would meet regularly in the lab interestingly, around a box of Cheez-Its for some reason. For some reason, it happened. It became a thing. It became a meme. But we sat and said, what can we do at birth? What can we do at 2 months, at 4 months, at 6 months? So we came up with a bunch of simple ideas and we put it into a Word document. And we had, here's what parents do. Here's why we would want parents to do this. How often do they do it? Just 5 minutes a day or anytime the child has a certain behavior, or make it a routine in the daily life at home. So we tossed this together. We ended up with 17 separate ideas that sort of roughly follow the developmental trajectory of babies. We start with what we call the word bath, which is like surround your child with language. That is never bad when the child is awake, at least. Don't wake your child up to talk to them. But all the way up to when they're old enough to put together words, which happens maybe at 1.5 years, where they have enough words in their expressive vocabulary to put together 2 words to make a proto-utterance. So then say that back to your child, but add 1 or 2 words to make the utterance just a little bit more complex, to show your child, oh, I can do this too next time, basically. So that's how we got started. We got the basic funding. We got the first few families. And once we had some pilot data, we applied for the NIH R01 grant, which is a big research grant, for about $1 million. And much to our delight, we actually got that money. So that's how we get the big clinical trial started.
And again, why NIH funding is so important.
Yes.
Because that led to the trial, which leads to this really revolutional, I don't think is too small of a word to say, program that could change kids' lives in developing speech from an early age. So you guys are developing these strategies that you're helping parents implement. Are you guys like hopping on a Zoom every so often? I think this was this pandemic time? So like everything was remote and you guys are just implementing these strategies as speech language pathologists, directing them to parents?
Yeah, so our speech language pathologist, Jenny, essentially handled all the implementation. It was all online, all through telehealth. And one reason was, as Nancy Potter had wisely predicted, there are not that many children in the US with classic galactosemia. So we knew we had to maybe go outside. So we had some children all over the US, but also some in the UK and some in Canada. And the telehealth modality was dynamite. Parents loved it. We have a paper out there on feasibility, and part of the survey that we asked parents to give us feedback on was, what did you think of the telehealth modality? And pretty much they loved it because they didn't have to go anywhere. They could just use their own device at home and meet with Jenny for about 15, 20 minutes. And that was so mega effective and so well received that we were now totally happy with keeping going via telehealth for the whole Babble Bootcamp research that we do.
That's amazing. And I know in a typical trial, you have a population of people who are taking a drug, and then you'll also have as a control group a population of people who are taking a placebo or aren't taking the drug. Does it work the same in this type of a trial that you guys were doing? Were people getting the services, but then were you also monitoring kids that were not getting the service that had galactosemia?
Well, in theory, it would work that way. In practicality, it did not. So when we were ready, so the grant that we got was for a randomized clinical trial. And randomization means, the way we had written it up, we would randomly assign families to the individual weekly intervention to no intervention at all, only data collection. And the NIH had said, okay, here's the money. But reality told us parents didn't like that at all.
Of course not, because I don't want to have my kid be a part of this program but not get any services.
And that makes perfect sense. We thought we had to do it that way because we needed a control group. And so then we had, you talked about team meetings. We have, to this day, we have one big team meeting every month. And so we were sitting together as a team. By then the team had gotten a little bit bigger to involve others. So we came up with an idea. It breaks my heart to think that some parents are not getting the intervention that we think will help. So we pivoted and created an alternate intervention. We pulled in a professor of occupational therapy who works for Northern Arizona University. But her campus is in Phoenix. We pulled her in and asked her to design an alternative motor intervention. And that's what we did. So she had some of her doctoral students do that intervention with the families, and we assigned the families randomly to the weekly speech versus the motor. And when children turned 15 months old in the motor intervention, that stopped and they went to see Jenny after that. So then we have a control group with an alternate intervention up to 15 months so that when we look at Babble, we can see the kids that had Jenny for Babble versus the kids who had no speech therapy at all. And we see big differences even there.
That's a really good idea. So you've got a occupational therapist doing one part of the study that's doing a program fully based on motor skills. Mm-hmm. So those kids, I would imagine their motor skills got pretty good. And then you've got, like you said, your speech and language pathologist, Jenny. What did those numbers, if they transitioned at 15 months from no speech services to speech services, at that 15-month mark, can you tell us some of the data on the differences between kids that had those speech services before and the kids that didn't?
We haven't fully analyzed all of our data. We're still in the process of looking at the data that we collected while the children were in therapy, but there is a Babble graph in the slides that I sent you. Okay. It's the line graph on 18, I think.
Okay, so I pulled up the graph that you've got. Tell us, does this show the difference in those two groups?
So on the x-axis, the little numbers are ages in months. On the y-axis is mean babbling level, which is a real simple way of quantifying how complex a child's babble is. And basically, they get 1 point for just making a vowel, or maybe a vowel and a consonant that's not considered a true consonant. Like if they say ah or yeah, then they get a level 1. If they say, and these are average numbers per month per recording, if they say baba or mama or da, that's a level 2 because they said a true consonant. If they said baga or dat, or not that, but yeah, that would work. If they say 2 true consonants in a Babble utterance, that utterance is a level 3. And what we see in the black lines there are data from our control children, because we had 25 children that were participating without any kind of a diagnostic category, just our typical controls. And the bars are error bars for 1 standard deviation. In the blue are the children who joined at 15 months. And in the yellow are the children who started at less than 6 months. And what we can see is the children in the yellow outbabble everybody else, including the typicals. But what we think is things are perking up just a little bit in the 15-month group in the blue when they're like 15, 16 months. But we will certainly look at that more carefully and do a paper on just the Babble.
Yeah, I mean, you see at 15 months when these kids have gone from occupational therapy to speech therapy, there's a rise, almost 0.3 is the difference between those 15 month 15 and month 16, and then it drops down a little bit, but 18 is up there, and I imagine it kind of keeps going up, and it gets actually pretty close to those children who have done babbling with speech therapy before 15 months.
Yeah, and I'll say that it's a little bit difficult to analyze these data very much further because children stop babbling and start talking. What we need to do is, at that point, we need to look. We have an alternate measure that is based on words, and we need to analyze those. It's just like the same points, but now we're doing the speech sounds in words rather than babble. So
that still needs to be analyzed.
Yeah, we haven't gotten around to that.
Well, and what would be really interesting is to analyze all of this data when you start putting together, hopefully, at some point you'll have enough data of you'll have brain bridge ropers, you'll have preterm kids, you'll have siblings of autism, you'll have hearing loss, you'll have galactosemia, and you can throw all of that data together and really get a really good picture of like the effects of Babble Bootcamp.
Yeah, and I think it might be specific to each particular type of risk that children have. So we can see that for classical galactosemia, it looks like it was quite very successful. Each other group that we will study will tell their own story, and there's no predicting how this will go. But the hope is, of course, that we will see improvements in outcomes that are better than business as usual.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I think what we hope to find is that earlier babble leads to better outcomes later. What's the science behind that?
So for the babble and the later outcomes, there's a slide that we can look at too for that. For one thing, the literature says high complexity in babble in the early ages predicts high language skills later on. This is what the literature says, both in typically developing children and children who are labeled as late talkers. That connection is there. Now, why that is the case, I'm not sure, but one thought that one might have is that the same parents who are very actively supporting their child's babble stage are the same parents who then, when the children are at the stage of saying their first words and word combinations, the same parents might be nurturing their child at every level. That's one possibility. The other possibility is that there is something inherent in the babble that lays down foundations for speech. And if you want to show the next slide, this is a transcription of two children's babble production. And can you see the little sound symbols there? Do you want to play the first one?
Huh.
So then if you want to play the second one and see what the contrasts are.
So those are pretty drastic contrasts between the way that those children are speaking. The one was almost purely vowels, and the other one had a lot of consonants in there. What were we listening to between those two kids? Were they two kids that had gotten different programs or were at different levels?
Yeah, those two children both have classic galactosemia, and they were both 11 months old. And I got these little sound clips off of one of their monthly recordings that the family sends us using like a day-long audio recording device. The first child has classic galactosemia and received traditional therapy. The second child saw our interventionist from the get-go. And on the next slide, I sort of, not to go into the weeds much, but we came up with a way.
Let's go into the weeds. Let's do it.
Okay.
It's a podcast.
Okay. Well, for each of these two children, we created a sound inventory. So we can't call it a phoneme because it's not speech yet, but it's some kind of a way to track what are the actual consonants, what are the actual vowels. And the child on the left is the one where you very correctly only heard mostly vowels. And well, there's some glides in there like ah, yeah, yeah. So the yeah is a glide. And the other child had a lot of b and d, real strong stops. And then the next slide shows how they did when they were 2.5 years old. So the little boy in the blue circle and the little girl in the yellow circle. What we're looking at that one particular plot is the Goldman-Bristow test of articulation at age 2.5, plotted as a function to the vowel scale that we, not vowel, sorry, the consonant scale that we computed. And so we're showing there that early babble complexity is somehow predictive of how children score on a speech test much later on. There's one more slide that you can show in this context, since you talked about how do you get from the babble to the speech. So this is like a table that I made several years ago, and that's in an open access journal. So I have the ability to show it and modify it and republish it as much as I want. What we're looking at here is in the 3 columns, target parent behavior, because basically the whole program works only through parent behavior. We're not dealing directly with the child. We're coaching the parents. We're educating the parents, if they're not speech language pathologists, basically to become their own speech language pathologists at home. So target parent behaviors. And the target parent behaviors are designed to elicit target child behaviors. And the more the child does the target behavior, like babble frequency, the more we are building child skill. And one example of getting from babble to speech is when children babble a lot, they will build a perception of, if I move this part of my system, my ears will hear that sound. And so they will refine the motor programs to say ba, 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 ba. It's, if you think about it, it's quite complex because you have to valve the outgoing air at the vocal folds, and you have to move your jaw, and you have to move your lips, and you have to build up a little pressure in your cheeks to make their bus stop sound. So the more children do this, the more skilled they become at this particular babble sound. Maybe they try out other positions, da, 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 ba, 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 ga, ga, ga. And then on that bright edge of the slide you're looking at, there are these pink arrows. Those are feed-forward loops. So if a child has a real strong sense of, if I move this, my ears hear that, then when they're about 12 months old, when they're about ready to attempt saying a word, and they know from listening to the language around them what the word should sound like, they already have an inventory of motor programs to try and hit that speech sound series. So that's among other things why people think that babies call their parents mama and dada, because that's a lot like babble, consonant vowel. So
yeah, it's not because they understand necessarily that you are mama and you are dada. It's more that's the babbling of it all. I'll keep these slides up on the YouTube version. If anybody is interested, you can tune into the video version of this podcast and see what she's talking about. But the target parent behavior is so interesting because one of the things that Babble Bootcamp, like you said, does is it teaches the parents. And you guys could have put together a program that was a speech and language pathology course on how speech and language pathologists should handle kids with galactosemia. But you didn't do that. What you instead decided to do was, let's put together this language that teaches speech and language pathologists how to talk to parents. What went behind that? Who thought of that, and how did we get to that? Because it's such a good idea. I think it's such a great foundation to build for the parents. Whose idea was that, and then how did it kind of turn into what it is?
So from the get-go, we knew that we were working with families that live all over the place, and there's no way that we can send out a speech pathologist to work directly with the child. That's one thing. Another thought was, think of the dosage effect. If you teach the parents the strategy and the parents do it every day at home. So for instance, if we teach the parent, oh, your child is 2 words, try and spin that into a 3 or 4 word utterance and give it back to your child. Well, if they do that all day long, the child is getting this 24/7, versus speech services, as you know, are for little ones, maybe 30 minutes a week or something, whatever is available to them when it is available in the first place. And so the dosage effect was also really cool. And we also know that parents are the ones who came forward to say, yeah, I want to be part of this clinical trial. We already know they are highly motivated. They want to do everything they can to do anything helpful to their child. So that's another thought. And also in speech pathology, when we teach our graduate students about all the different ways of doing speech therapy, one of the models is parent implemented speech therapy. If the parents know what they're doing, then they can do it at home. And that is oftentimes born out of a scarcity of services that are just not there. It's like long wait list, not enough. One of the reasons that we were invited to collaborate with people in the UK on Down syndrome is that there are such high needs and not enough professionals to implement this. So, making parents their own experts in an area where they can't really do any harm or damage. They can only do good if they follow the instructions. That's all of these things went into the recipe for Babble.
Yeah, and we've heard that on this podcast. Even we had Becca Jones, who has a little one with galactosemia, and was talking about how speech services are just, if you even get a chance to be on a list, the list is so long. Mm-hmm. And by the time you're through the list, your kid has got so many delays that, mm-hmm. You just had to wait too long. So that makes a lot of sense. And I think it's such a good strategy to take to teach the parents, because we all want to do the best thing for our kids. So you mentioned some of the results we saw were that kids with higher babbling skills turned out to have more promise with better outcomes later. What other pieces of data did you find in Babble Bootcamp that maybe surprised you or are just worth noting that are very, very important?
So part of what's worth being aware of is how parents feel about the intervention, because they're like the crucial link between us and the children. And, was it practical? Was it hard? Was it easy? So understanding what was hard for parents, we learned in the process that parents didn't mind at all doing the intervention activities. They were very happy to do those. What some of the parents said, the research. We ask a lot of our parents. We ask them every 3 months, here's a packet of questionnaires. Please fill it out and send it back to us. And that gets, especially the one that measures language skills in preschoolers, the MacArthur CDI is super, super interesting and worthwhile to us. But for parents to bubble their answers in takes a few minutes of their time. So but in real life, that's just only because this is a clinical trial. Once this becomes an intervention, we don't need to do the clinical trials anymore. And then parents would just participate in the activities and do them and meet with the SLP once a week or whatever. And then they're off to the races.
Yeah. Were there any specific children or family stories that really stuck with you that you think, when you think back, that kind of stand out?
Yeah, I can think of a few. So the very, very first family that signed on to the Babble Bootcamp was a family who had just been given the news of the galactosemia. And this particular, it was a father who called me, was, anxiety probably describes it quite well. There's, the fear of the unknown. Here you have this beautiful newborn baby, and you were told your child has classic galactosemia, and says, what is that? What is coming our way? We don't know what it is. And so I've always had a huge amount of respect for the parents and how this is for them. And the other thing in that context that I would like to say, in the process, we've learned something. We've sort of heard this before in the world of precision medicine, but knowledge is power. So if you know what you're dealing with, you don't have to sit there and passively let things happen to you. You can take charge. You can do things. And I think one of the most powerful things, not to make a pun here, but the Babble Bootcamp, empowering parents to take action and see the fruits of their hard work as they go along, and remember, oh yeah, I need to say something back to this little child. So yeah, that
that is it's so relatable. In fact, you mentioned the dad that called you when he had a newborn and had just been given the diagnosis. I think I had that same exact conversation with you. I remember the week my son was diagnosed with classical galactosemia, and I found the Babble Bootcamp flyer, and I found your phone number. And I remember calling you, having no idea who you were, having no idea what this was. I just was like, hey, this was, August of last year. I was basically like, Dr. Peter, my name's Ryan. I've got this newborn. He's got Galactosemia. I saw this flyer about Babble Bootcamp. Can we enroll? And you were like, well, it's already finished, but and then you put me in touch with some resources, and it was so helpful. But that anxiety of, I've got this newborn and he's been diagnosed with galactosemia and I don't know what to do is so relatable. And like you said, knowledge is power, which is like 90% of the reason that I do this podcast is just to like find out more knowledge and pass along the knowledge to the parents. Because when you know that speech, for example, that speech therapy and early intervention at a very, very young age can have such a difference in a kid with galactosemia, it empowers you to be able to stand up before the panel that's reviewing your case and say, here's the data that shows that my kid should get speech services. And it empowers you to watch some Babble Bootcamp videos and speak with a speech and language pathologist to start enacting things like babbling back to your kid, or, like you said, putting them in a place where they can see your face really well and see your mouth move, like all those little strategies. You start to feel like you're doing something and not like you're overwhelmed. I mean, I always feel like I'm overwhelmed by the diagnosis, but it becomes like I'm pushing back a little bit, like I'm also doing something too.
So true. So true.
Yeah.
Yeah. Another family that sticks out is not classical galactosemia. This is a mother of 5. And these 5 children all had severe apraxia of speech for reasons that no one knew at the time. We have a hunch now because we did a genetic study with them. But she came to me in my lab at ASU and said, can you help me? I'm pregnant again. And so she had her 6th child. We put him in Babble Bootcamp just as soon as he was ready, like he wasn't even a month old. He did Babble Bootcamp until he was 2 years old. And we still need to do the study of how his progress differed from his older siblings. But that mother told one of my colleagues that she was not a novice mother, but having this interaction with our speech language pathologist and seeing in some ways for the first time, oh, this baby is trying to talk. This baby is putting lips together while I'm trying to talk about mama or mommy, something like that. So there's itty bitty tiny little signs that she had missed with her other kids and that she was now really in tuned in. So that was another huge benefit that she got out of Babble Bootcamp, is to really be a much, much better clinical observer.
That's such an encouraging story to hear. And it makes me think of something. I had a question earlier that this just reminded me of. You mentioned that you were really interested in the genetics of speech, and you had mentioned that in Washington it was like that doesn't really exist. And is that something that now, like, are there genetic markers you can look at when it comes to speech disorders that show where it comes from, or is the genetics of speech a thing?
It is getting better and better, and so a lot of the research focuses on apraxia of speech because that is such a severe issue. Some of my colleagues will focus on speech sound disorders of any kind, like Barbara Lewis. By the way, I was the facilitator of the research symposium of the big ASHA conference, American Speech Language Hearing Association, last December in Seattle. And I had invited some of these folks who study genetics of speech. And Barbara Lewis was there. She's done this for a few decades. Shelley Jo Kraft was there, who's doing it for stuttering. Simon Fisher was there, who does all kinds of big picture work in the intersect of neuroscience and speech and language and the genetics of it. So it was quite an interesting session. So people have been looking at this. But my dream is what we need going forward. In part, we need to train our speech-language pathologists a little bit better in genetics so that they can pick up red flags for children who have maybe a severe speech problem. And it could be part of a syndrome that hasn't been diagnosed yet. And one of those examples could be Bainbridge-Roper's, because that was only discovered in 2013 and with just 4 children. And now worldwide, there are hundreds of children, and identifying them early and knowing what to expect and knowing how can we best counteract, how can we create resilience for this child against that particular set of risks. That's where I would love to go. So early identification is super important.
Well, and that's super important for everything. We see it in our community a lot, where it's like, early identification is a necessity. Otherwise, it could lead to death in your child if you're still giving them breast milk. Mm-hmm. So, like, even for treatments, it's very important to identify things early. I have a couple more things I want to ask you and tackle. One of them is the Babble Bootcamp is now expanding to Down syndrome, which we've touched on a little bit. How did you get to start piloting Babble Bootcamp in this new population? And, what did you see in the original platform with Galactosemia that maybe needed to change a little bit once you started going into Down syndrome?
That's such a great question. So on slide 22, I have part of the answer how I got into Down syndrome. To be perfectly honest, I was not an expert in Down syndrome at all, although I had a few children with Down syndrome in my clinical practice as an SLP. This is Professor Sue Buckley from the UK. She worked at the University of Portsmouth. She's now retired. She is the head of research and the co-founder of Down Syndrome Education International. And one day out of the blue, it was in 2022, I believe, I got an email from her. She had just read one of our papers on classic galactosemia in the American Journal of Speech-Language Pathology. And she'd seen the basic structure of what we're doing. And she said, well, can we collaborate? And she did say that one of the things that attracted her to Babble Bootcamp is the upscalability. That is, there are quite a few children with Down syndrome in the UK, but not enough speech-language services, especially proactive ones. So that's how we got started in the world of Down syndrome. I had no expertise in Down syndrome prior to that meeting with Professor Buckley. And by the way, I have to, this is like really bad on me. I had to look up, what is this letter sequence after her name, OBE? What is that? I had no idea.
I don't know what it is.
Oh, good. I'm not alone.
I don't think anybody listening to this podcast will know what that is.
I ask that question every time I give a talk when I talk about Professor Buckley. Well, OBE is Order of the British Empire. It's the highest civilian honor that they can receive from the. And this woman, I met her personally. She is phenomenal. She is a real champion for children and adults with Down syndrome. She's done so much good for so many years. It's been such a pleasure to work with her. And so, she was who got us involved in the whole world of Down syndrome. So you said, how do we change the Babble Bootcamp? We just had a paper out on the pilot study of 10 children with Down syndrome, and where we describe some things. If you think of the Babble Bootcamp as a Swiss Army knife, it can be modified to any particular group of children that are going to benefit from it. Children with Down syndrome can have visual problems. So then we're working with parents to say, when you're playing with something, when you're talking about something, make sure it's in plain view of your child close by. They can have fluctuating hearing loss. So the parents learn to watch out for days where the children don't seem to hear very well and adjust their vocal volume. And also, so one thing that I learned from my colleagues at Arizona State, I'm working now on the Play Bootcamp, this new version, with people who are experts in early childhood development and earliest cognition. And what I've learned from these colleagues is children with Down syndrome can have hypotonia in their fine and gross motor systems, meaning it's hard for them to manipulate objects. And so in the Play Bootcamp and in the Babble Bootcamp for Down syndrome, parents help their children to hold toys so that children can play with the toy and learn from the cause and effect that the toys give them, that experience, while not being held back by their hypotonia. That's one way that you can modify the Babble Bootcamp.
Wow. Yeah. And it's so cool to see like this thing that started out as a Babble Bootcamp pilot program with you and Dr. Potter looking at kids with galactosemia, which we know there's only 80 to 100 born a year. Like it's such an ultra rare thing. Now make its way into something like Down syndrome, where there's a much larger population of kids with Down syndrome and things that, and it'll just keep going too. It'll keep spreading hopefully into these areas. And it's just so encouraging. And it also just feels really good from a galactosemia community standpoint of like, see, we're important, you know?
Yeah, you definitely are. I mean, you're the children with galactosemia. They were like the proof of concept study.
Yeah. And it should be anyone out there listening with a kid with galactosemia, or if you have galactosemia and you're listening, you know, it's just proof that, like she said, proof of concept. This is something that like a difference that we can make and you know, helping others. And I want to end on something that I didn't tell you I was going to do. So I'm going to, you know, if we have to do it on the fly, that's okay. But one thing that I've always wanted to do with Babble Bootcamp is give listeners and parents very tangible takeaways of strategies they can use at different points. So like you mentioned, when they're very, very young, putting them in a location where they can clearly see your face and they can see your mouth movements and make sounds at them is very important. So I'll give you, if it's okay, I'll give you a month or a time frame of a child, and you tell me a strategy that's important for a parent to do in that child's time frame, and we'll just kind of go up every few months. Does that work?
We'll try.
Okay, cool. So let's start with as early as 2 months. You got an 8-week-old. What would you recommend? One thing, just one thing that a parent does with their 8-week-old.
At 8 weeks old, children start to make cooing sounds. Those are not biological sounds like burping or anything. Those are intentional sounds, and responding to the sound, acknowledging, oh, you know, cooing back, saying something. I think that's what I would recommend. Responding
to the cooing. Mm-hmm. And then, you know, let's fast forward to 5 months old. You've got a 5-month-old. At this point, they're a little more developed. Recommendations for a 5-month-old.
You can do a lot of things. This is a little bit younger than when we expect Babble to surface, but still, that is still a great opportunity to engage in back and forth with your child in vocalization. Your child makes a vocalization, you make a vocalization back, and then in some ways, you're building the scaffold for dialogue later on.
I like that. Some back and forth. Try and get your kid to say something, and then you say it back, and you do a little bit of back and forth. Okay, 8 months, 9 months. We're starting to get into the babble phase. Yeah. What's something that we can do?
Yes,
this one's for my own personal edification as an 8.5-month-old with some babbling going on.
Oh, that's so cool. I love babbling. I hear, little babies in the store babbling, and this is so great. This is so fun. So there at 8-9 months, they will produce babble or babble-like sounds, and they will oftentimes start with just repetitive, not always, but repetitive, ba, 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 and do this over and over. So what parents can do is teach them how to babble. They can say something back to them, ba, ba, ba. How about da, da, da? And showing the child their face while they're doing it, and seeing if the child is going to try this. I have this little video that probably won't have time to play now, but it shows a mother and a child. The child is 9 months old, and the mother is.
Do I have it? Did you send it to me?
It's there. Yeah, it's on slide number 10. Okay, so this is a little girl who's 9 months old, and she's in a stroller, and she started Babble Bootcamp at 2 months old, and her mom is doing exactly what we teach parents in the Babble Bootcamp to do is to hold Babble conversations. And also, if the child is mastering one type of Babble, introduce the next level up. And the next level up, you will see they're going from reduplicated syllable repetition to the next level up is just a slight little tweak on that to the tiny next level of complexity.
All right, I'll play this video.
So what were you saying? Ba 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 ba. Are you saying a ba 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 ba? Yeah. Mommy. 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 Get your feet. Mommy.
That's amazing. And that's, you hear, we're watching her push a stroller and she's just, you hear the back and forth, ba, 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 and then the baby, ba, 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 ba. What do you love so much about that video?
I love the back and forth, and I love the babies imitating the mom's utterance. So the first few times I listened to that video, I didn't notice it, but the more I listened to it, and I just played it last Monday at Northern Arizona State University because it's so great. You can hear the baby is imitating not only the consonant and vowels, but also the mom's intonation. And then when the mom switches to, can you say, mommy, you can hear the baby is switching the vocal register to a higher pitch. And that's an aspect of imitation that is easy to miss, but it's all part and parcel of the whole Babble Bootcamp. It's so much more than just mechanistically say ba ba ba. There's so much more. And
that's amazing. Yeah. All right, let's keep going with our timeline. So fast forward, maybe let's say 13, 14 months. I don't even know what a 14-month-old does yet because I don't have one, but I assume at that point they're talking a little more.
Yeah. And I was just thinking, listening to what you were saying, it's worth reminding people that not every child with classic galactosemia is going to have speech problems. Even if they don't get the Babble Bootcamp, maybe 10 to 20% just never have a problem. And who knows whether this little girl is in that category or not? We just don't know.
That's a good point to also remind people that every baby develops different timelines. If your baby is not babbling by 8 or 9 months, that doesn't mean that, they're destined or doomed for a speech and sound disorder. It's definitely good to implement strategies, but it's every baby develops at a different timeline.
That's very true. That's why in our publications, when we show this table with the target and child behavior, the target parent and child behaviors, we say that there's no age associated with any of this. It's like every baby follows the steps at their own pace. But for you said 12, 13, 14 months?
Yeah.
Yeah. So this is an age where words come online, single words. And what really helps to build your child's vocabulary is to things in the environment. You can look at simple picture books and point to car, bear, whatever it is, or things in the vicinity of the child. The child might point to something. And when the child points to something, that's a request for something. Maybe, tell me the name for that thing. And so the child points to this. And you can say, oh, that's a cup. That's daddy's cup. Or that's mommy's cup. So making a real rich environment for the child with lots of single word exemplars. So the child can build the receptive vocabulary and also they're expressive. So if they do say words, oftentimes their words are going to be approximations. They're still words, So we had one parent fill out a MacArthur questionnaire where my research team said, is this a word or not? Because the mother had written there for the word toothbrush, the child said, bah. But that's still a word. To the child, that is their word, and it counts. It is a word. But what you can say at that point, the child says, bah, and you could say, yes, brush. So then you can mirror the word back to the child in the way that you say it to allow the child to keep that in their memory. Oh, I need to work on my articulation a little more, but I know what I'm talking about, and my parent is giving me the word again. So
that's great. That's amazing. And then, 2 years old, let's say, where are we moving on to actually talking at that point? Are we still in Babble Bootcamp strategies, or are we in a completely different place?
Well, at 2 years, our Babble Bootcamp ends, and our speech pathologist has been excellent at working with parents individually, exactly at the level where that child is. So if we have a 2-year-old who's talking in sentences, the speech pathologist might help parents figure out strategies how to make the sentences more complex. Making a sentence that has words in it like because or before or after to give the child a sense of, I can hook up sentences to form like a much more complete thought, a much more complex thought that I can put together with words if I just put this little word in the middle.
Yeah, it's much more individualized at that point, it sounds like. Well, thank you for appeasing me on on playing this little game that I just thought of in the moment. I think it's really good to have some of these actually tangible takeaways that maybe after you listen to this, you can go and try out. We'll end on just, final thoughts. You have had such a journey with the Babble Bootcamp program, and it doesn't seem like it's even close to being over. It's only getting started. But we, as the Galactosemia community, we focus pretty heavily on our own community, and it seems like Babble Bootcamp is branching out a little bit. Final thoughts just on Babble Bootcamp or Galactosemia in general, or any thoughts you would have for the community at large?
Yeah, so we had a lot of inquiries from parents who want to enroll their child, classic galactosemia or Down syndrome or, various other things in our Babble Bootcamp. Well, currently, we don't really have additional clinical trials that we can enroll families in, but there is the training that Northern Speech Services hosts in Babble Bootcamp techniques, and it's not specific to any particular condition or age. It's like the basic. It's called, Nancy Potter calls it the basic course. And she priced it at a level that's, I shouldn't speak for other people, but it's priced at a level it's
accessible, I would say.
Compared to other interventions, this is the best I've ever seen. And for students, they have a special rate, which is essentially close to free. And I get asked, so is this only for speech pathologists? And no, Nancy has said many times, this is for anyone who's interested in working with very young children. You don't have to be a speech pathologist. Anyone can try this. Yeah.
That's right. And I'll put a link to where you can get it. It's $149. Like Dr. Peter said, if you're a student, I think it's like $15 or something insane like that. So, if you've got a student in your household, use their .edu to buy it. But I talked to Dr. Potter not that long ago about just encouraging everybody to listen to it and watch it if you've got little ones, because even if you don't have somebody with galactosemia, it's helpful to do these strategies with just kids that don't have a diagnosis of any type. It's not going to hurt them at all. In fact, it's only going to help their babbling and help them progress a little bit faster. So I'll put a link to that training in the show description. Okay. Well, Dr. Peter, thank you so much for joining us today. I appreciate you walking us through the data. That's something that I've wanted to do a long time, and I don't think there's any better person to walk through the data of Babble Bootcamp with than you. I appreciate you taking the time out to talk with us, and you're welcome on this show if you ever want to come back. You've already been on it twice. You and Dr. Potter are the two most, you've been on the show the most, so come back anytime.
Thank you. It was a very great pleasure and honor to be on your show. And thank you for doing the good work, for spreading the word and encouraging parents and being an advocate for little itty-bitty children who have classic galactosemia. It's fantastic.
I appreciate that. It's a lot of work, but it's so worth it. So, all right, we'll talk to you soon, and thanks for everything.
Okay, thank you so much.
All right, bye.
Bye.